Liberty Nation. Truth is making a comeback.
You're a rich girl and you're gone too far, 'cause you know it don't matter anyway. You can rely on the old man's money. You can rely on the old man's money. It's a bitch, girl, but it's gone too far, 'cause you know it don't matter anyway. Say money, money won't get you too far, get you too far.
Hello and welcome to another edition of LNTV, a project of LibertyNation.com, where we interview our authors on stories in which they have expert knowledge. So joining me today is our legal affairs editor, Scott D. Cosenza. I'm Lisa K. Donner, editor-in-chief. Thanks for joining us today, Scott.
Thank you, Lisa.
And I'd also like to mention that Scott is a lawyer, so he talks with authority on this subject. All right, so the latest development in the Stormy Daniels case involves the Treasury Department. Could you backfill a little on this case and then tell us, why is Treasury involved?
Okay, well, Stormy Daniels is suing Donald Trump in order to have a court rule that an agreement that she signed with Donald Trump is not a valid agreement with the force of law. So she signed an agreement. She was paid $130,000 in exchange for which she agreed to remain silent and not talk about an affair that she had with Donald Trump or any private facts that she learned while she had a relationship with him. She doesn't want to hold up her end of the bargain anymore and wants to give back the 130 because now she can make many, many multiples of the 130 if she weren't bound by the agreement. So,
all right, but wait a second. She's already breached the agreement. So
if there was an agreement, meaning there was an agreement, there was a piece of paper called an agreement that she signed, and she did get the money. Now, whether or not that constituted a legal contract for which she's bound, that is currently what's at stake in this court case. That's what she and her attorney have alleged is the case, is that while there is that piece of paper, it does not constitute a legal contract for want of her or her attorney having a copy signed by Mr. Trump. They don't have that, and they're saying that because they don't have that, there in fact was no legal agreement in place, and that she is now free to just go about the world and talk about her experiences with Mr. Trump in spite of the agreement that was signed. Now, it's funny that you say, you know, a lawyer and speaking from authority. Here's how this works. I've never heard of anything like this. And so you pick up the phone and talk to a bunch of lawyers that you went to law school with. Like, have you ever heard of anything like this? How does this work in your state where you practice? Anything like that? And I have never seen, and none of the attorneys that I've talked about this with, which have been several, have seen a case where a person not to be charged under the contract can be charged without their signature. And so just to break that down, let's say I contract with you for the sale of 100 widgets. Okay. I pay you $1,000 for the widgets, which was the agreed upon price, and you deliver me the widgets as stipulated in the contract. But you never signed the contract. Well, you took the money and you gave me the widgets. So how can I then sue you and say, there's been no contract? What are you talking about? I gave you the money and I took the widgets. We're done here, right? That seems to be the straight line path for a court to rule on this contract, but we'll see. It's California, and we don't know.
Right. So getting back to the Treasury Department, what do they have to do with this?
Okay, so the $130,000 that Stormy Daniels received on the confidentiality agreement to shut up about Donald Trump was paid by Mr. Trump's attorney, Mr. Cohen, in the form of a wire transfer sent to the bank account of Ms. Daniels' then attorney. Pretty simple stuff, pretty basic stuff for any transaction like that. The Wall Street Journal reported recently that that transaction was the subject of a suspicious transaction report filed by the bank called First Republic Bank with the Treasury Department. Now, Mr. Avenatti would have us believe that this means that there's some major bank investigation going on concerning these funds, and he's proceeding as if he is some sort of non-deputized United States attorney prosecuting crimes that he imagines may have taken place. That is not authorized in the law. While we lawyers are officers of the court, we're not empowered to go and enforce federal law all by ourselves. That's left to the law enforcement and federal authorities. So I think what this is just what most likely happened is that bank received a subpoena from one of the many federal investigations of Mr. Trump, and commensurate with receipt of that subpoena for information surrounding this transfer, they filed the suspicious transfer report, which is just sort of a paperwork thing that is done with some degree of frequency. But Mr. Cohen rushed to Twitter and the PR wire to send out this press release, you know, with his letter to Mr. Mnuchin. That name's a little troubling for me with the Secretary of Treasury, to ask him to publicly release this information. It's a bit of a, you know, he's like a P.T. Barnum guy, I think now. You know, when I first encountered him in the public eye, commensurate with his representation of Ms. Daniels, you know, I was sort of like, I didn't really have a sense of him one way or the other. But the way that he is not about being in court or in his legal papers, but more about being on Good Morning America or CNN or on Twitter, seems to me like that's really his sole purpose.
So let me just see if I understand this. It's suspicious because?
Well, we don't know why it's suspicious. We would actually have to have the form that the bank sent to the Treasury Department. But presumably,
what are the possibilities, Scott? I mean, what are the possibilities of a suspicious transaction?
Lisa, banks are federally chartered. They have many regulations that would fill many phone book size things about things that they're required to do. And one of the things that they're required to do is keep an eye on their customers' funds to determine if there are suspicious sources for those funds, to be on the lookout for money laundering, for drug sales, and that sort of thing. So, for instance, it's somebody who seemed uneducated and barely able to get together a few bucks, came in with a couple suitcases full of hundreds of thousands of dollars, the bank would be required to say, hey, is this kosher? Where did this money come from? That's one instance. We don't have any sense of what the instance is here. Another instance, which I suspect happened here, based on reading the accounts of people who are former federal bank regulators, is that anytime a bank gets a subpoena asking it about a transaction, it automatically flags that transaction as a suspicious activity, just by the nature of the subpoena. And given the volume of investigations and breadth of investigations concerning Mr. Trump, that seems to be what is the most obvious choice here, is that they got a subpoena from commensurate with one of these investigations and then filed the report for that. It's not about some other criminal activity that they think or Treasury thinks is involved with this payment on the contract to Ms. Daniels from Mr. Cohen.
Okay, so Avenatti tweeted, quote, "Where have the two legal geniuses of our time, Michael Cohen and David Schwartz, gone? Forced to sit down by Mr. Trump after repeatedly making a disaster of their case on national television and being mocked by every real lawyer in America." So what is he referring to?
Yeah, maybe I don't know any real lawyers in America.
Smoking something?
I haven't seen anybody mock Mr. Yeah. Well, the thing is, he's trying to try the case in the court of public opinion. And I think that is usually indicative of somebody who doesn't have the goods to try the case in the courtroom. And by the goods, I don't mean his ability as an attorney, but I mean the facts on the ground. I don't think the facts are there to support a victory in this case. If we judge a victory, that contract will be declared void. If victory, however, is Mr. Avenatti gets a mountain of attention for himself and his client, is able to denigrate Donald Trump, perhaps damage his reputation in the electorate and within his family and embarrass him, and perhaps the icing on the cake could be, which is what he was hoping for, to have the president ordered to submit to a deposition where he's then under oath, and then potentially get a perjury trap involved. Now, that seems to be the end game. Right. And the reason why I think that tweet is relevant, Lisa, is because it just seems quite telling about what his real motivations are.
Okay, so quickly, where do you think this whole thing goes from here, legally speaking?
It's a California court. It's a federal court, but it's in California, and they have a tendency to make rulings that surprise some of the rest of us in the rest of the country. But I'll say that if that weren't the case, I would expect that this would be ruled to be a valid contract, and that Ms. Daniels sadly got horrible advice when she went public in spite of the agreement that she signed, and is going to have to, she's going to have that judgment against her for millions of dollars, which I presume she can't cover. So that would be my guess.
All right. Thanks for joining us today. And thank you, Scott, for your legal opinion. Please subscribe to our Liberty Nation YouTube channel, and be sure to join us again for another edition of LNTV.
Liberty Nation. News and commentary, minus the propaganda. LibertyNation.com.